Can I just say very quickly before we get this started, because this is one of my favorite films of all time, you had a lot of choices about what you could do on a snowy Saturday afternoon, and you're here, so you are my people. Thank you. I cannot tell you how warm my heart was walking in to watch like the last 20 minutes of this and seeing a full theater. It was just gorgeous. So thank you very quickly, thank you. And thank you guys for being here. Congratulations on your short and the Oscar nomination.
Thank you very much.
I am given to understand, and please correct me if I'm wrong, that it took close to a decade to get this going. So I'm curious how you pitched this to your aunt and how long it took you to finally go, okay, sure, I'll do it.
Well, I believe she finally said yes after about 9 years of asking, when I promised to make a film that would spotlight teaching and the double bass and classical music. And I promised to bring new audiences to the double bass and classical music. And I think we kept that promise. So.
What do you think is the most misunderstood aspect about that instrument? Yeah. Sure, why not?
Is this on?
Yes.
It's on. Yeah. Unaccustomed as I am to actually speaking. Closer? Okay. Well, I think people don't understand that it can be a melody instrument as well. Oh, I got it. I hear the feedback. Echo, echo, echo. I think it's misunderstood because people think of it as maybe grumpy and only playing in the low register, but we actually have a 4-octave range in the hands of an expert player. So I think that's one of the misunderstandings. And I think the score to the short documentary, as opposed to the long film we just saw. I think that the score, which is basically arrangements made by my teacher Fred Zimmerman for 4 double basses, he made for his students when he was teaching at Juilliard, and he made bass quartet arrangements of some Renaissance and medieval music and things like Mozart Ave Verum and things like that, so bass players could enjoy playing chamber music together. Because there are some pieces that everybody knows, like the Trout Quintet, but to play 4 basses together, he thought that that was a wonderful, kind of exciting thing to do. And so I think you hear the background music, you hear 4 double basses playing in all different octaves and doing different things, and I think it's quite beautiful and quite moving emotionally.
I know you started out playing the piano, and then you said that the bass actually found you because your high school orchestra needed somebody to fill that, and you were desperate to play in the orchestra, and so you took it up, and the rest is history. I also know you said that you like the fact that it's a ballast instrument because you have all these notes falling around you, and you're kind of holding the bottom together. How did playing that instrument in particular affect your musicianship? Do you feel like you might have been a different musician if you'd played the viola or the cello or stuck with the piano?
Well, of course, if you play piano or the upper strings, including cello, you have a huge vocabulary of chamber music available to you. There are many, many Mozart and Haydn quartets and trios, and there are 16 glorious Beethoven quartets that are the staples of the concert literature. And I was thinking if I had taken up the cello, then that would have been open to me, which would have been wonderful. But then maybe I would have missed the fun of playing in orchestras, because when you're in a music school and the conductor complains at rehearsals, well, the violins didn't play their part, you didn't practice, or the cellists didn't practice. That's because all the violin and cello teachers are telling their students, you're going to be a soloist, you're going to have to play in an orchestra. That's not going to be a terrible fate for you to play in an orchestra. Now people realize it's a great thing if they get a job in an orchestra. It's a steady salary, it's health insurance, it's all kinds of other things, and a steady life, as opposed to roaming around hoping for the next Broadway show, let's put it that way.
There's a montage in this short that makes me both giddy and cringe at the same time. And it's when you're reading the newspaper clippings about what people were writing, when you first joined the Phil. I literally think I have to buy a new laptop because there was a point where I just like spit out my coffee. Like I was so shocked by what some of those people wrote back then. How did you manage the sort of burden of breaking that glass ceiling and also just being the best player that you could possibly be? Because you got hired at the Philharmonic because you were the best player for that position.
Well, there were 77 bass players that auditioned for 2 openings. And the young man that got the other opening and I stayed friends on the same stand for the next 30 years, which was glorious, I must say. He was a wonderful person, wonderful partner. We kind of steadied each other when the going was rough. And you know, when you had a conductor that wasn't particularly talented or something like that, yes, that happens once in a while. Very seldom, but once in a while. We couldn't always have Leonard Bernstein, let's put it that way.
It's like Philharmonic Confidential right now, I love it.
That's right. Well, all that stuff, I was actually very upset that Molly had my former students, Jackie Danwo and Leah Bench, read some of that stuff because I had forgotten about that. I saved the clippings just out of habit. You know, you save clippings like coming from a movie family, you sort of save the clippings. Now I'm sorry I did in a way, although you could have looked it up, I suppose. You have your ways. But still, I thought it was embarrassing to read all that nonsense. And especially since the people in the orchestra already knew me as a musician, as a professional player. In fact, there were several musicians that went from the New York City Ballet, where I started out, into the Philharmonic before I joined. So I had them as friends when I joined the orchestra, and people that welcomed me, and people I could tell a joke to in the intermission, you know, that we could sort of have fun together. And go to eat together on tours. That was another thing that's fun. If you go on tour and you go out, you know, before a concert to go have some food, and you eat with your colleagues and you tell stories, and the percussion section particularly enjoys telling stories about terrible things that happen during concerts. That's another enjoyment nobody talks about. It's a secret pleasure that musicians have.
Molly, I'm curious, just because there are moments in the documentary, even the fact that it's only 35 minutes, you still managed to include some moments where you can tell that maybe there's a little tension happening with this project. You know, the idea of I want to celebrate my aunt, who's been a huge inspiration to me, and Broken Barriers has been this incredible musician who played with the Philharmonic for, 55 years, right? Right. And I'm not that important. Maybe don't make a whole documentary about me. You know, it's really more about the work and the art and less about me. How did you kind of balance that so you were able to make a film that kind of serves both masters, if you will?
Well, it was a challenge. I mean, I think essentially that's what the film's about. It's about my attraction to somebody who's a master of her art, but doesn't want to be seen as a master. So is humble, but expert. Her expertise and her level of mastery is at the highest level, but she also wants to stay in the background. I think that is beautiful, difficult to communicate, difficult to balance, but completely beautiful tension that I'm glad you're seeing in the film. You know, our culture is a culture of individualism, and we're all trying to be soloists, whether we're musicians or not, and elbowing each other out of the spot. Enough, you know, it's the key to a happy life is to learn how to be part of an ensemble. We all are parts of ensembles all the time, and it'd be good to learn how to enjoy it a bit more and stop trying to be in the spotlight all the time. So I feel like that is the central thing I was trying to say, and we were trying to say, because by the way, this film was also made by an ensemble, so it wasn't just me. It was my editor, it was my producer, it was my co-producers, all of us, you know, seeing what emerged from the footage, and that's what was emerging, this idea of ensemble.
Well, I think you even say this, if not explicitly, then implicitly within the film, that you're like, I had two parents who, you know, were movie stars that really kind of existed in the limelight, and I got to be this background player that sort of held everything together. And I remember thinking, I wonder how many therapists are going to be in the audience today, and, you know, asking for insurance information at the end of this hour. It's very interesting to kind of see, though, how you took that pocket, that literal and figurative pocket right there, and just made it your own, so that you existed in the limelight without actually having to step in it.
That's a wonderful phrase. I think that's beautiful what you just said. I kind of just enjoyed the ambiance and the music around me, because when you're in the middle of a bass section, or at the end of it, which I often was, I often played on the first stand, because we all rotate in position when someone's missing, we all rotate up and so on. And just the feeling of the sound of the instruments in the aggregate all together, plus the other instruments in the orchestra, it enfolds you like a warm embrace. It's magical. It's also the sound reverberating in your body. It's like a sound massage, if you will. It's a pleasure. It's a pleasure, a sensory pleasure, as well as an intellectual and artistic pleasure. So how many pleasures can you experience?
No one answer that. No one answer that. We don't have enough time. Before we move on to Sunrise, I have to ask, you've spoken a lot in press about the film, and you speak a little bit about this in the documentary, Molly, about what an inspiration your aunt's been to you in terms of following an artistic life and staying true to your creative values and that kind of thing. And yet, I have to imagine making a short film like this, even if it's only 35 minutes, is going to bring up a lot of revelations for you. You're going to see an entirely different side of your aunt that maybe you haven't seen. What did you feel like you learned about Orin in the process of making this?
She's not joking. She really doesn't want to be in the spotlight. It isn't. She's not putting it on. It's real. It's really real. And I recognize that we are torturing her right now. And just like Bernstein and the New York Philharmonic tortured her in 1966 when she became the first full-time woman in the orchestra and they thrust her in the spotlight then. I think it's for a good reason. I hope I've kept my promise to you to bring a new audience into the work, and but I fully admit that I thought that maybe she would like it eventually, and that was wrong.
I'm just curious, a quick show of applause. Who is seeing Sunrise for the first time today? Wow. Oh my God, this is great. Thank you guys so much for coming out. Welcome, one of us. Do you guys remember the first time that you saw Sunrise? And I'm especially curious as to what your reaction was, because obviously, like, seeing your dad, playing this role and really this is one of those showcase roles that I feel like shows you what he can do. Maybe the Westerns that he did for RKO didn't ask that much of him, but this really shows you what an incredible screen talent he was, I think.
Well, the first time I saw it was when I came here to New York to study, and then I remember in the 1960s, I joined MoMA, and I saw, for the first time, I think I saw it at MoMA in one of the film series, and I think I saw it with friends, and then I also saw another film of his, which you probably know it, Fig Leaves.
Oh yeah,
It's
Howard Hawks one.
Right, it's hysterically funny. I didn't realize my father, I knew he had a sense of humor, but he shows his comedy side there, which I think is so hilarious. Riding a dinosaur to work and having the alarm clock, which is a monkey throwing a rock at your head. Primitive alarm clock. I just thought it was, my father was basically out of work by the time I grew up to know him. And when I visited him after I became a member of the Philharmonic, I used to take a recording with me and say, Dad, I want to play this recording. Oh, please, can I just talk to you about what my work used to be? He used to want to talk about the old days in movies and how much he loved and admired F.W. Murnau. That was the director.
Yeah.
Do you know that he loaned Murnau money to make the score for that last film that he made about Tahiti? I can't remember.
Taboo, I believe.
Taboo, that's right. About the pearl diving,
Yeah.
and the curse on the location of the pearls. And he loaned Murnau the money to make, because Murnau at that point I think had run out of backers for some of his projects, but Murnau died before he could recoup the loan, which he didn't mind. He was sorry to lose Murnau as a friend, because he died in an automobile accident when he was quite young compared to, I think he was in his 40s probably.
That sounds about right, yeah.
Yeah.
Do you remember, I really want to hear what George had to say about working on the set, but just really quickly, do you remember the first time you saw this?
Yes, I was 9 years old, and it was at LACMA in Los Angeles, where I grew up, and where Grandpa George was living at the time, and he was there, and he carried me on his shoulders down the aisle to the Q&A, and I sat sort of on the steps looking up at him, and at the end, he was just swarmed by fans, and I was madly in love.
What did he say when you did talk to him about working on this, and how he said he loved Murnau and all of this? Like, what did he say about the experience of making this film?
Well, I have to tell you something that I don't know if it's generally known, but I did tell this to Alec Ross, who's writing a book about Murnau. I did tell him the one thing I do remember strongly as a musician. Dad said that Murnau had a string quartet come to the set and play certain music to put the actors in the right mood for whatever scene it was, which this thrilled me as a musician. I was so happy to hear that. So I thought that was kind of fascinating.
It was funny, I hope you don't mind me sharing this. Before we came out, I had said, like, it's amazing to see this and how wonderful it is and to see your dad up on screen and stuff. And she goes, yeah, but what about the score? I was listening to the score, and did you hear that? I think I know the person who was actually playing that one part. Like,
If I had been so, I think it was Tasha Seidel, who was working in the studios at the time. I mean, the musicians know each other, and and they recognize, and that kind of playing, that gorgeous, luscious string sound, is something that was benefiting everybody in the movies and the scores and everything. On that kind of level of musicianship that was common at the studios at the time was wonderful, really.
well, can you still then pay attention to your dad's performance? Can you look at it as an objective performance, or is it just like, that's dad up on
I can do more than
screen?
one thing at a time.
I'm sure.
Sorry, I had to make a joke.
Thanks for coming, everybody. I'm slinking out the back in a second. No, I think we were talking a little bit about this earlier. Like, he worked with wonderful directors. He made numerous movies with John Ford. I think The Iron Horse was the film that kind of helped make him. I mean, it's funny how much Westerns play a part in your life, because your mom, Margaret Churchill, is in The Big Trail, which was John Wayne's first big film, and one of the first films to be shown on 70mm.
They were 6 months on location in Jackson Hole, Wyoming, and my mother told me, she kept a notebook about that. I don't have it, I wish I did, but she said that the guys used to go out with guns at 4 a.m. to shoot the snakes away from where the actors would be. Yeah, and that the guys that were portraying Indians riding bareback had makeup sprayed all over them so they would look like Indians. I guess they didn't think about hiring real Indians at that time, maybe, which was a shame. Others said they all got very sunburned and sore from riding bareback the first day because everybody was nude, and you can't ride horseback nude without injury. So I remember that's one thing that she told me that kind of stuck in my mind somehow.
So what goes through both of your heads when you see it now then?
It's a masterpiece. It's so beautiful, but when I watch it, there's Grandpa George. He died when I was 18, so I had quite a lot of time with him. And I'm just so proud to see him up on the screen. And he's, the in-camera effect, for the filmmakers in the room who know what I'm talking about, the in-camera effects, the sets that they built entirely on the back lot in Los Angeles, the 20th century, and it's a remarkable feat of filmmaking and of cinema, and it's a thrill to watch. Thrilling.
I think of him being so young. He was 27. He was 27 years old when he made that film. And I do know also, because he spoke about it many times, that Murnau had taken my father to Germany for a few months that year before they made the film, I think to show my father culture, music and art. And I also remember reading comments about the film for years, because I did do a little research on it when I got older, and I was sort of able to be interested in things that my parents did, which wasn't too interesting to me when I was younger. Naturally, you're interested in your own things. But I remember hearing the influence of expressionist art on Murnau. and the angles of the film and certain things that he did with the way things were photographed. And I was struck with how painterly some of the compositions are in that film.
So many forced perspectives. I mean, from the moment that the vamp walks into that dining room and you see everything's kind of slightly tilted and stuff, even if you know German expressionistic films of like the late 1910s and early 20s, it's still amazing to think like, oh, this was a movie made by a major Hollywood studio in 1927. I mean, William Fox brought Murnau over from Germany after having seen The Last Laugh, and essentially said, make a German expressionistic movie, but make it in Hollywood. And the interesting thing too is that after, and we're going to get back to your dad in a second, he's wonderful with this, but what always cracks me up about this is that the Sunrise comes out, everyone's like, this is one of the most amazing silent movies that's ever been made. 10 days later, Warner's, just to spite everybody, puts out some movie called The Jazz Singer. And then suddenly everyone's like, silence? What's that? Who wants a silent movie? And Murnau kept making them, and he makes this film called Four Devils, which is now lost for Fox, after he does Sunrise. And then he makes a movie called City Girl, which is almost the exact, like, reverse mirror image opposite of Sunrise, because it starts with a Chicago waitress who meets this hick from the sticks that comes in to basically try and sell corn for his dad's farm. They fall in love. He takes her out of the city into the country, and then that's where all the problems start. It's amazing. They're almost like mirror images. And so, Sunrise is one of those films that still feels incredibly ahead of its time 100 years ago. I was telling you earlier, like my college-age kid saw it in her film school class and was sort of like blown away by it. So, and yet, as much as everybody talks about Murnau and the expressionism and the filmmaking, I really think it's your dad and Janet Gaynor's performance that kind of anchors it and stuff. And it's really not one of those playing to the cheap seats silent performances. It feels like a modern performance, what he's doing up there.
Well, I mean, I'm certainly not an expert in film history, but I find it very touching to see my father interacting with Janet Gaynor, who we always spoke about lovingly. His fellow actors, he loved to be around them. That's what he missed the most about not acting, I think, was the camaraderie. And that's something that I guess he passed on to me, because that's part of what I loved about being in an orchestra. The camaraderie with your fellow workers, the people that share the same ideas and values and craft. And he enjoyed that. He enjoyed sitting around the campfire after they finished filming, and talking and joking and sharing a meal. He really was one of those people that craved company. So he was a likable guy, and he was very good with animals too, and children. Yeah, he was. He was a nice person. He was a good person.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here. Thank you for going into the family business. Congratulations on Oscar nomination. Thank you guys for coming out.